Hey, everybody, welcome to another Friday News Lunch from the Bucks County Beacon. This is Kevin Mahoney coming at you on this cool and rainy Friday after a week of sweltering heat. I don't know about you, but I'm welcoming it. I am welcoming it. And if you've been watching the show for a bit, you know that we're changing up the format of the Friday News Lunch a little bit to include some interviews with local organizers, activists, advocates, and writers from the Bucks County Beacon. Well, this week I've got a great one for you. I welcome Karen Feridun to the show. Karen has been one of the strongest and most persistent voices pushing for climate justice in Pennsylvania. She's the founder of Berks Gas Truth and co-founder of both the Better Path Coalition and No Faults Climate Solutions PA. And, my former show from Raging Chicken, Karen was a frequent guest, always out there in the fight for climate justice. So on the second half of today's show, we'll be talking about Pennsylvania's House Bill 502 reset plan, which is part of Governor Shapiro's lightning plan that he claims will position the Commonwealth as a national energy leader for decades to come. But in a letter sent to members of the PA House Energy Committee ahead of a hearing on the bill this week, Feridun and co-founder of No Faults Climate Solutions PA, Karen Elias, they laid out, how the bill amounts to a sidelining of PA's commitment to renewable energy in order to court big data farms and other projects desired by the crypto and AI industries. Oh, glorious, glorious. The devil is always in the details. And on next week's show, I want to give you a heads up, I'll be talking to the Bucks County Beacon reporter, Melinda Rizzo. Now, you've heard her we've heard us shout out her name weekly for the great coverage that she's giving to all sorts of events across Bucks County. And this week is no different. So I'll be so psyched to talk with her next week about her reporting, a little bit about her background. The opportunity for you to get to know some of these writers a little bit more. Look, everybody, this week is no different than all the rest. We're going to need independent, community-supported progressive media in the weeks, months, and years ahead. There could not be a better time to take a moment, head on over to buckscountybeacon.com, and click that Support the Beacon button. Become a supporter. You can become a monthly entry-level supporter for as little as $1 a month. I kid you not, $1 a month. Look, or jump in as a regular supporter for just $5 a month, or a yearly supporter for as little as $50 a year. You can also drop a one-time donation to help keep the Beacon's critical lens focused and sustainable. Just go to the buckscountybeacon.com, click on the Support the Beacon button, and become a supporter today. Well, let's see what we got on the menu this week. Big news, of course. Zohran Mamdani scored a stunning victory in New York City's Democratic primary on Tuesday. Mamdani ran on one of the most progressive economic and social agendas we've seen in recent memory. Mamdani took a 43.5% of the vote, which led disgraced former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo to concede the race that night. Looked at the numbers, they have a runoff system there, so there's actually 5 candidates, but he looked at the numbers, there's no way they're going to be able to overcome this. This is despite the fact that Cuomo was backed by most of the boomer Democratic Party leadership, despite his corruption, his credible ongoing cases of sexual harassment of at least 11 women, and the cover-up of nursing home deaths and deflection of blame during COVID. Yep. Despite that, you had Clinton, you had kind of all sorts of, people coming out of the woodworks to put their weight behind Cuomo because they fear giving up their power to a candidate who better represents the world today. Just great. So what a huge victory. Now today, we're expecting, by the time this is running, and I'm talking to you now, maybe this has already come down, we shall see, but the U.S. Supreme Court is slated to decide on whether federal judges can issue nationwide injunctions. Now this is coming up, this has been called the, birthright citizenship case, but it's not quite that. They think that the Supreme Court is unlikely to rule on birthright citizenship. However, really the case is about whether a federal judge can say, hey, wait a minute, this case brings up constitutional questions, so we're going to put a pause button on that until it's litigated so that everyone gets equal law across the country. Well, so what Trump has been trying to do, right, is been to, basically say, no, we need to get rid of that. We need to get rid of these nationwide bans by federal judges. The case has far-reaching implications for Trump's abuse of power, including the aforementioned ending birthright citizenship, the issues of bans on transgender people serving in the military, and sending alleged dangerous illegal immigrants to third country prisons, like third country prisons, like that torture chamber prison in El Salvador, and a whole slew of other issues. But right now, the federal courts have been one of the few few places that have been able to kind of halt some of the most egregious attempts by the Trump administration and Trump to kind of consolidate more power. Earlier this week, the Supreme Court ruled that South Carolina, and by extension now any state, can ban Planned Parenthood from receiving Medicaid funds to provide medical care at its clinics. That is going to be painful for a lot of people. Senate Republicans are taking a second shot at cutting SNAP benefits, good old food stamps. That will impact more than 42 million Americans. Why are they doing it? Well, they want to pay for Trump's giant billionaire tax cut. A big, beautiful bill. Oh, yeah. And the U.S. government bombed Iran. How about that? Like we needed something else, right? To escalate. In the Beacon this week, Pat LaMarche reports on how 7 PA Democrats joined Republicans to punish homeless Pennsylvanians instead of working to fix the problem of homelessness. Despite rising levels of homelessness, Bucks County alone saw a 25% increase this year, which LaMarche reported earlier. PA lawmakers decided that the only solution to the housing crisis that they could envision, because their creativity is boundless, the only one they could envision was to criminalize sleeping outside so they would never have to actually see the homeless. How about that? The Democrats who voted for the bill are Senator Lisa Boscola, Senator Jay Costa Jr., Senator Nick Miller, Senator Nicholas Pisciatano Jr., Senator, yes, from Kutztown area, Senator Judy Swank, Senator Christine Tartaglione, and Bucks County's own Senator Steve Santorciero. There you go. Maybe those people need a little call. What do you think? Or maybe a letter. Maybe some social media post. What do you say? Their names are in the show notes. Melinda Rizzo lays out the story of how Bucks County Republican Sheriff Fred Herron illegally gave deputies pay raises. County Commissioner Diane, Ellis Marseglia criticized Herron and Republican County Comptroller Pamela A. Van Blunk for bypassing county commissioners and the deputies union during contract negotiations in order to kind of gonna pass it on to you so your allegiance is to me, that kind of thing. I guess that's a good look ahead of the expansive attempts to make Bucks County Sheriff's Office mini ICE agents, right? In a special to the Beacon, Frida Savannah of the Pennsylvania Capital Star digs into Trump's deep cuts to the National Institute of Health funding that could, quote, unravel decades of work, quote, by 3 Doylestown-based nonprofits. These are the Hepatitis B Foundation, the Baruch S. Bloomberg Institute, and the Pennsylvania Biotechnology Center, which is one of the leading biotech incubators in the nation. And the Hepatitis B Foundation is the only institute solely focused on finding a cure to hepatitis B. And so this is a great interview. I want you to get over there and read that story because it really not interview, but a good story. And it interviews with all the people to talk about the impacts are going to be on those industries. And I don't know, did you happen to see a big green bus outside of Representative Brian Fitzpatrick's office with a Stop the Billionaires giveaway plastered on the sides? Well, Naomi Weiss covered the event, which was part of Fair Share America's national bus tour to pressure legislators not to support the Republicans' big, beautiful bill because of its deep cuts in Medicaid, SNAP benefits, and a whole lot more, just to give the billionaires more of what they already got. And a Beacon exclusive, Stephen Kinzer, he's an award-winning foreign correspondent, senior fellow at the Watson Institute for International Public Affairs. Well, in this exclusive, he argues that Trump's attack on Iran will only further destabilize the Middle East. Great piece, go check it out. And in a moving op-ed, Larissa Hopwood walks us through the cruelty behind the Republican budget bill and Trump's top health official, Dr. Oz's public statements that Medicaid recipients should prove that you matter in order to keep their benefits. Can you believe this guy? Hopwood's son has type 1 diabetes, and they rely on Medicaid to help provide him with life-sustaining insulin. She calls on Representative Brian Fitzpatrick and Senator Dave McCormick to vote against the bill that will thrust her son and millions of others into crisis. And there's a nice little ditty in this piece toward the end. It says she called Fitzpatrick's office to urge him to do this, and she got a message back, right? Got a message back, said Representative Brian Fitzpatrick would never vote to cut Medicaid funds. And that's even though he voted twice already to do just that. Once again, the PR machine of Brian Fitzpatrick trying to pull the wool over our eyes. We're not having it. Not having it here at the Beacon. Look, we're going to need independent, community-supported progressive media in the weeks, months, and years ahead. There could not be a better time to take a moment to head over to buckscountybeacon.com and click on the Support the Beacon button. Become a supporter today. We're going to be right back after the break with my interview with Karen Feridun. But I should get ahead of myself here, because after the break we're going to come to Karen Feridun. But I want to talk about some of these stories real quick, and just what some of the implications might be. So I don't know about you, but how are you doing today? I'm finding today to be it's one of these weeks where I think I'm starting to find my footing again, if you will. There's been so much going on in the news. There's been so much going on, I don't know, everywhere, that I get exhausted, and with the weather just kind of made it that way. But I seem to kind of be coming around to something different, and I think a lot of it had to do with seeing what happened with this week's victory. By Zohran Mamdani. I can't believe I'm doing it. You know what? I've watched this video so many times of him telling Cuomo to learn how to say his name that I end up tricking myself up. It's the weirdest thing. But what's fascinating to see about this race is a few things. Now, these are things that we've all talked about on this show, like, for years now. We've talked about, I've written about in the past. People cover this in the Beacon consistently. And it is this, in part generational, in part political battle that is kind of happening within the Democratic Party. And I say sort of because if you watch what the Republicans' internal conflicts are, they tend to be like, out in the open slugfests where you have, open warfare really within the party. I mean, that's really how how these kind of right wingers took over the Republican Party. I mean, the extreme right took over the Republican Party, and how they now all bow down to Donald Trump. It's very much, they have these, ideological conflicts, and many times explicit within the party. The Democrats, they don't do that so much. It's like the Democratic Party leadership, especially the kind of boomer generation that has had control of the reins of the party for decades now, and just refuses to get rid of their power, to like even hand over at least one of the reins to somebody else that may be different from them, right? It's like it's this obsession of and it's not just these Democrats. It's a generational thing, I think, too, as well. People who got really successful that came out of the boomer generation. Same true with the tech billionaires and all this stuff. So the older ones, right, that did that. They really had difficulty and have difficulty giving up their power, right? Especially if they see the next generation has different ideas than they do, right? Because they believe that they're just right about everything. And they're better than everyone else. They're smarter than everyone else, right? Obviously, I'm generalizing here, but that's what it appears. That's what it appears like, right? So when you have people like Chuck Schumer, for example, it's laughable to even call him a leader of the Democratic Party right now, but he is the senior leader in the Senate, right? So he's the one that speaks for the Democratic Party in the Senate. Like Nancy Pelosi was the same way within the House for a long time, right? And now these are people who at one point, right, in the kind of political stream, as it were, over like historical stream in the Democratic Party, had decently kind of progressive positions on things, right? The problem is that the world has moved on, and they're still back in the 90s. right? They're still wedded to this kind of Bill Clinton triangulation. I'm afraid of Republicans and I don't want to say what I believe in because we're worried that people won't like it, right? And that has got us into the situation that we're in now. I mean, Chuck Schumer is like, where the hell is Chuck? Right? What has he been doing? Right? Not a whole lot. Right? And anything that's coming out of his mouth seems like it's spoken by like Grandpa talking to himself over the den. Right? And this is not to say this is not a cut on the guy because he's old. It's a cut on the guy because he's becoming increasingly irrelevant and dangerous to the Democratic Party. Right? I don't even want to say dangerous to the Democratic Party. I want to say dangerous to the future of this country, right? Because if we have one party who has shifted so far to the right and is in lockstep behind an authoritarian push, and we have another party who's worried about offending people or offending the Republicans who have moved over so far over to the right that they're defending and bowing down to the authoritarian push, then we don't really have an oppositional party, right? And even worse than that, not only do we have an oppositional party, we don't have an official party that is speaking to the concerns of Americans today. Instead, what we have, who's capturing those concerns, is the far right, who are preying upon people's concerns and increasing feelings of desperation or being left behind, whatever it might be, and then stoking that with fear for their own purposes of gathering power. What's the alternative? Right? Going up and saying that, we're less bad than Donald Trump without offering or just say Donald Trump is bad, that's not a platform. That doesn't tell anybody how they are going to help this country or help our neighborhoods or help our school system, right? Help our roads, right? Help our lives. Right? If I'm struggling to find affordable housing and you're just telling me Donald Trump bad man, I don't see myself in that message. Right? And because we have to be clear about this, the housing crisis is not caused 100% by Donald Trump, right? This has been long time in the making. And some of the senior leaders of the Democratic Party are complicit with that agenda, right? They got on board with a kind of like with big tech back in Clinton's era when they thought, oh, we're going to get our own billionaires. That's how we're going to deal with it. We don't need to talk to labor so much anymore. We don't need to do the kind of hands-on politics, community organizing stuff anymore because we got our own billionaires now. Well, those own billionaires, which they put so much stock in, are now the people like Zuckerberg, Musk, right? Yeah, I mean, you name it. I mean, yeah, Bill Gates, considered the good billionaire of them, Jeff Bezos, right? These are all kind of people that these Democrats, right, the Democratic leadership got in bed with. And we're in a different place, right? Those people have turned to the right because look, I mean, what are billionaires always going to do, right? This is always what happens. They become increasingly concerned about maintaining and expanding their own wealth and power, right? And so it's inevitably going to move in that kind of like authoritarian kind of like direction, right? Even the good billionaire, and I'll say this, every time I think about Bill Gates, even the good billionaire, Bill Gates, who's given all sorts of money to charity and all that kind of stuff, which he truly has, right? He's also had a disproportionately negative effect on things like public education, right? Because Bill Gates had it in his head that we're going to bring in these people and we're going to study education and we're going to put forward our own plan and we're going to put a ton of money behind it, right? But in order to be eligible for this money, you have to do all this metric testing stuff, high stakes testing and all this kind of stuff. Right. And then so they convince school districts and all this other stuff that, hey, we'll give you this money, but you have to do this kind of stuff. And then after a decade of experimentation with what was going in public schools, of not relying upon teachers or relying on so-called tech experts in order to kind of talk about educational policy, they found that, well, all that money and all that like complete transition and impact on public education, what has it done? Well, marginal at best, hurt things at worst, right? No impact is like the median. Except the way that we do schooling now is fundamentally changed with no improvement in kind of like, outcomes. I mean, that's just messed up. So That's just because billionaires are told by everyone around them that they're the most brilliant people out there, that they're the ones who can solve all the world's problems, and everyone gives them accolades and feeds them back in about how great they are. And so then they start to believe it themselves and thinks that, suddenly they're health experts and suddenly they're education experts and suddenly they're you name it. But that's the world that the Democratic Party leadership has increasingly kind of moved toward. And the rest of us, right, who seem to, are on the more progressive ends of things or even liberal ends of things, or just want to kind of make sure that we've got the basic needs met of our families, right, that we're able to eat when we're hungry, we're able to find a place to sleep when we need shelter, we can get access to schools, and not just like a warehouse where I'm going to send my kid for the day, but actual schooling that's going to help them kind of with the tools to engaging in a proactive way in a democratic society, right? A society that kind of is more than just your job, but is kind of like your community, your life, your art, your culture, all this stuff. So, anyways, the Mamdani victory showcased, on the one hand, what the old school Democratic Party leadership were willing to do, right? Literally, kind of come out of retirement again to back Andrew Cuomo, who, and I say at least 11 women have come out with credible kind of allegations of sexual harassment and abuse by him, and is ongoing in the courts. He's actually sued to get access to their gynecological records. Right, a guy who lied, was so concerned about his own aspirations for presidential candidate that he lied about nursing home deaths and actually sent people back to the nursing homes knowing that they had COVID, which then spread throughout the nursing homes, causing spikes in deaths in nursing homes, and then covering up that and blaming other people for it until he was found out otherwise. I mean, this guy, look, I'm from New York. I'm from upstate New York, right? And, this guy is known to be corrupt and to be power hungry. And despite all that stuff, despite, all these people who were out there behind the Me Too movement, who then are now switching gears and say, no, we're going to back Cuomo, the guy who could have been a poster child for what the Me Too movement was fighting, and put their support behind that guy. Why? Because Mamdani's a democratic socialist. He's like Bernie. And we can't let them have power. That's more important. We'd rather have the sexual harasser in power in our city than to possibly move in a more progressive direction. And what are they afraid of? What is Mamdani doing that is so? Is he going to he's going to I don't know, take over, paint all the buildings red and have us all, singing the Internationale? Is that what it? No. Guaranteeing the continuation of free pre-K, of looking for ways to make housing affordable. So, so the people who spent generations in New York aren't forced to leave because they're priced out of living. To make sure people don't go hungry, make sure people have access to health care, improve public transportation, right? To kind of feed into the need to, to get away from fossil fuels, to make it a more walkable city. I mean, the things that people in their everyday life want. The thing that Hillary Clinton once said, about Bernie's policy is Bernie's promising everyone a pony and not everybody can have a pony. I always remember that. And what was he talking about? He's like, oh, universal health care. And that was the pony that Hillary Clinton was talking about. You can't have a pony. I can have a pony. You can't have a pony. And yet we're looking at our neighbors to the north, right? Over in Europe and all these folks, they've got their ponies. It's only people here who can't have their ponies, apparently. But that's really what it comes down to. It's a different vision of what government should do. Should government just kind of work at the margins to make things a little bit less bad? Or should we actually have an agenda, right, on the kind of like on the progressive side of things, right? Should we have an agenda that speaks to people's needs and desires? And that's what Mamdani did. And that's why he got 43.5% of the vote in a five-way race. Had he cleared that 50% in that one race, he would have won outright. Now they have the tally up the other things, and everyone's expecting that this is, he's gonna. It's the margins are just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger when all the additional votes or the ranked choice votings get sorted out. Now, of course, because Andrew Cuomo is kind of, he's only concerned about himself and his quest for power. He is staying on the ballot, at least for now, to run as an independent in the fall. So is Eric Adams, right? Eric Adams, who took the basically whatever like Trump promised in order to open up New York City streets to ICE raids, right? Made sure that he kept out of jail because, again, another corrupt politician. So Eric Adams is also saying he's going to run as an independent. And I bet you there is going to be a ton of money coming into this race. And, as Mamdani said throughout the race, it's going to be, once again, they've got money, we've got people. Just like AOC has always said, they got money, we got people. And, they're showing their chops. Kudos also to the folks in DSA and Working Families Party and all these kind of like community-based organizations that have been building power from the ground up, knocking on doors. They had 50,000 volunteers going around knocking on doors in New York City. I mean, that's incredible. And, I wanted to focus on this just for a little bit today, just because watching how the media deals with this, right? And the explanations for how he won, but then also, the amount of hate that is going to be coming forward, particularly from other Democrats, the Democratic leadership people, right? Versus the love that is going to be coming from more of the younger generation of Democrats, like, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, you name it. Like the whole squad is going to be kind of out there, like Ilhan Omar. I know it's good. So you've got these folks, and Maxwell Frost. You've got another victory for the next generation. And I do believe, and this is where those got me in my good mood towards the end of the week. I do believe that like the millennials and Gen Z folks who are kind of moving forward, who are doing the organizing now, are not interested in repeating the mistakes of those boomers who are in power. They are interested in creating lasting community-based power, not just, somebody rising up the ranks or ladder climbing, as it were. Right. So, kudos to all the people that put in the work. And I do think this is one of these moments that offers increasing opportunity of hope for what we're all doing in our communities. Right. Now, obviously, we're not New York City. Right. So I'm not trying to say this, it's automatically transit, but it shows long-term investment in organizing and work, plus a strategic and hopeful vision, right, for what we want to do. Not just we're less bad than them, not just like Donald Trump bad man, but rather we're gonna talk about an agenda. Right. We're not going to shy away from it. We're not going to try to kind of like mince our words like to sound more palatable. No, we're going to offer something affirmative. And you might not win that first election, but once you start building on that, once you start building on those kind of platforms, when you're actually doing deliverables for people, I think then that's the place. That's the sweet spot of politics. So be good. I want to give some shout outs to some amazing work once again in the Beacon this week. You heard me talk about the stuff at the top of the show, but great piece by Pat LaMarche. And it's another one of these examples of why we need to keep the pressure upon all politicians, right? That team sports politics just is not good. Team sports politics, when we say vote blue no matter who, or vote red till you're dead, or whatever it might be, That's just that just supports a particular structure of power. It does not necessarily guarantee that we're going to get what we need or that we're creating a just society. And a perfect example of this, Pat LaMarche's piece on the PA lawmakers deciding that they're going to go ahead and criminalize sleeping on the streets or sleeping outside without, 7 Democrats joining the Republicans. And there's no plan in place for like how are you going to actually address the homeless crisis. Yeah, we're going to get words from people said, yes, we know, but now we need to double down on this. They say blah, blah, blah. This is an example. Like these people should be held accountable. I'm going to read the names for you again. These are all Democrats. Senator Lisa Boscola, Senator Jay Costa Jr., Senator Nick Miller, Senator Nicholas Pisciatano Jr., Senator Steve Santarciero, right here in Bucks County, Senator Judy Swank, and Senator Christine Tartaglione. Right? Those are the Democrats that voted to criminalize being homeless without any way of solving the crisis. And you might hear those names and someone says, yeah, but like he's a good guy or she's done some good thing. I'm not going to argue with you about that. I don't care about they're good guys, bad guys, wonderful women, horrible. That's not the point. The point is that there are like elected representatives. And frankly, Democrats are more susceptible to our pressure than Republicans are. So to these folks, again, shoot them an email. Let them know. Let them know you cannot believe that this is what we're going to do. This is how we support the people. This is how we enact a kind of a progressive agenda is we criminalize homelessness for real. Got to be kidding me. But it's a great piece. And Pat LaMarche, as usual, is doing just kind of bang up work on kind of like the unhoused, about following that kind of policy and see how it impacts us right here in Pennsylvania and right here in Bucks County. Melinda Rizzo, once again, she'll be on the show next week. She's got this great piece. Again, this is the kind of stuff, you heard like Emily and I talked about this in the show several weeks back. We've talked about multiple times, but this is like a perfect example of why the Beacon's work is so important. They're able now, in part because of your support, right? In part because the people who've stepped up to the plate became members of the Bucks County Beacon, right, are now kind of ongoing supporters of the Bucks County Beacon. We're able to hire people to do this kind of reporting. And Melinda Rizzo's reporting is exactly this kind of stuff. I mean, here you're getting a story about how Bucks County Republican sheriff, right, along with the Republican county comptroller, Pamela A. Van Blunk, we're basically getting around or kind of trying to bypass the county commissioners and giving the deputies raises, right? Ways of kind of like channeling money without accountability to give people raises. That is not to say, let's be clear about this. That is not to say that those deputies didn't deserve raises, right? That's not even the question here, right? The question is, how does that happen? Is it, and who then, is in charge of that process? Does the sheriff do this and hand these things out when he wants? Or is there a process that goes through the deputies union and their contract negotiations and gets approved by the county commissioners, as is the law, right? As is what's supposed to happen. And then that's all kind of transparent and out in the public. That's what the story is. And, nobody else is covering this stuff except the Beacon, right? And Melinda Rizzo has been kind of like, that person who has been like at these meetings, kind of covering this daily stuff so that we now have the tools and understanding what's happening in our communities, right? To respond. And Fred Herron, of course, now again, this is not to kind of connect these two things too much, but Fred Herron is the same guy who basically went around the county commissioners, right, to sign an agreement with ICE in order to kind of have to make their deputies like part of, mini ICE, right? Little ICE minions right here in Bucks County, right? Who would then go out and kidnap people off the streets with their face covered and so on, right? With our money, right? With outside county, the county commissioner's approval or even knowledge for that matter, right? That's the kind of stuff that we're able to see now because of this reporting. So kudos to them. ACLU lawsuit is going forward. Fred Herron on his kind of the deputizing, the ICE deputizing agreement that went around the county commissioners. We're going to follow that some more too as well. Another great thing that the Beacon is doing here too as well is that you've got connections with other reporters across the state who are covering things too as well. So this Frida Savannah piece on the cuts in NIH funding and the impact on Doylestown nonprofits is an exceptional piece. The Pennsylvania Biotechnology Center. I remember reading about this years ago because they were really out in front and they've become one of the key national biotech companies in the country. I mean, one of the most kind of leading incubators in the nation, right, to really help support the development of kind of biotechnology and biotechnology research and so on. And now that's all in crisis, right? You're talking about work that when you cut off funds and you cannot continue a study, you're going to lose results, right? And you're going to go backwards. And so it's not the kind of thing like, for example, when you're seeing the results of this Republican budget, where you're just going to immediately kick people off Medicaid, right, or force them to go through kind of like 10 rounds of paperwork and proving that they're worthy before they'll in order to keep their funding or something like that. Which then people, again, study shows this: the harder you make it for them to get the benefits, the fewer people that want to go through that, and they deal with it some other way. And so it's a shadow cut. But even in that, you could say, here's the cut in funding and here's the impact. The NIH funding cuts for research, in particular for institutes like these, what that does long term, of course, is that it makes research into cures or ongoing care more difficult, or doesn't continue, or these institutes close. The research gets lost, the cures don't happen, and you have a degradation of everyone's health as a result of it. Right? It's a long-term thing. And the worst thing about these kind of cuts, when you're basically cutting research and potentially putting these institutes at risk in generally, what's the worst part about that is that it's not like you can just flick the switch back on and then suddenly they're up and running. Even if you have a change of administration and then they're refunding these institutes, it's going to take years for them to get back up to the place where they're at right now. So again, great piece by Frida Savannah for the Pennsylvania Capital Star, special to the Beacon. Naomi Weiss has been just doing bang up work. She's an Bucks County Beacon intern for the summer, out of University of Pittsburgh, doing just great writing and research and coverage. She covered this event, which was a national bus tour for Fair Share America. Big green bus. It was great. I don't know if anybody saw the pictures of it, but you go over to buckscountybeacon.com, check out Naomi Weiss's piece, and you can see a picture of the big bus that was outside of Fitzpatrick's office, talking about, again, the cuts in Medicaid and SNAP benefits. I know Cyril was super psyched about this one. Stephen Kinzer got a piece basically about how Trump's attack on Iran is going to destabilize the Middle East even more. He's a big name, right? The guy's an award-winning foreign correspondent who's covered international affairs for decades, just outstanding reporter, and now he's a senior fellow at the Watson Institute for National Public Affairs. Gave an exclusive to the Beacon this piece about what the implications can be for U.S.'s or the Trump's attack on Iran. And finally, Larissa Hopwood, from Doylestown. She was actually interviewed by Cyril, was part of the Signal one week. She has got this great and really moving op-ed piece in the Beacon, and it's it's about, once again, what are the implications of cutting kind of Medicaid. The piece is called, Dr. Oz, Senator Dave McCormick, and Representative Brian Fitzpatrick want my son to prove that he matters enough to keep access to Medicaid. And it's really, it's these kind of stories are so important as part of the fight, right? Because it's not just this abstract cut to Medicaid, but we're saying, here's a perfect example. this is what this is going to like. This is what Medicaid is doing, right, in order to keep people alive, right, and getting access to healthcare and kind of life-saving medications and things like this. So, so check out her piece, and it's a really kind of moving piece. She talks about, I really love this piece in part because she's talking about her situation with her son, but then she's also talking about her engagements with these representatives. I just want to read you one piece of this. She says, our experience with Medicaid has shown me just how essential this program is for helping us and countless other Pennsylvanians to meet our basic needs. Senator McCormick and Representative Fitzpatrick have a moral responsibility to their constituents to protect Medicaid. We're not just numbers. We're the people they were elected to represent, and they must fight for us. Republican leaders' votes on this critical budget are the barrier between their constituents and programs that cutting would send us into a free fall. I've called McCormick and Fitzpatrick multiple times. Fitzpatrick's office called back and assured me that he would never vote for a bill that would cut Medicaid. Since then, he has voted twice for bills that would severely cut Medicaid. Right? That's where the rubber meets the road right there, right? Here you have, individual who's going to be potentially thrown into crisis with these cuts in Medicaid. And then she calls the representatives like you're supposed to do, and they just lie to her. They just lie. And that's really where cruelty is the point. Because, if they're not going to be held accountable for their lives, they're not going to be held accountable for their votes. I don't know what else, I don't know what to say. You just got to get rid of them. You got to kind of vote these people out. So here. Well, everybody, let me remind you that we're going to need, this is all the more reason why we need independent, community-supported progressive media the weeks, months, and years ahead. Head on over to thebuckscountybeacon.com and click on the Support the Beacon button. The Support the Beacon button. I love to say that now. It was like so hard to kind of get my mouth around that for a while, but there you go. Become a supporter today. And look, so we're going to take a quick break. And after the break, we're going to come back and you're going to have my interview with Karen Feridun, the founder of Berks Gas Truth and co-founder of both the Better Path Coalition and No Faults Climate Solutions PA. You're going to love the interview. If you're not familiar with Karen's work, I'm excited to introduce you to her. So this is Kevin Mahoney signing off for part one of today's show. And we'll see you on the flip side with the interview with Karen Feridun. Talk to you soon, everybody. See ya. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Friday News Lunch from the Bucks County Beacon. It's Kevin Mahoney sitting here with you after a sweltering week of record-breaking temperatures like all across our region. I don't know about you, but after that kind of intense rain and weird coolness of a spring, getting smacked in the face with 100-degree temperatures right on beginning with Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday were something else this week. Which is one of the reasons why I'm happy that, I don't know if I'm happy about it as much as like why we need people like our guest today, Karen Feridun, here on the Friday News Lunch. Karen is the founder of Berks Gas Truth, co-founder of the Better Path Coalition and No Faults Climate Solutions PA. Today, we're going to be talking about a Pennsylvania House Bill 502, a reset plan. It's the lightning plan from Governor Shapiro. And, you hear a name of a plan that's called the reset plan. It's coming out about energy and, how to help things. Sounds good, right? Well, the devil, as they say, is always in the details. So we're going to get into that a little bit and some of the issues that we need to be paying attention to with the plan of how to deal with energy going forward so we don't destroy our Commonwealth and the planet. So with that, I welcome Karen. Karen, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. So great to be back with you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, now for those folks who, who've not met Karen yet on a show like this, on my former show and Raging Chicken Press, Karen was on quite frequently over the years when talking about major legislation was coming forward. So glad that we're going to bring her here to this venue too, as well, to talk a little bit about what's happening in the state, especially when it comes around climate issues, because it seems to me with everything that's happening in the federal government right now, we're on our own here in the state. And so this is where we're going to have to put our focus. So great. So Karen, for those folks who may not be as familiar with the work that you do and all that, can you give us a little sense of your background, kind of the work that you do with Berks Gas Truth, with and this relatively new false no faults climate solutions PA, and the Better Path Coalitions? Give us a sense of kind of where you sit in this world.
Sure. So 15 years ago, I started Berks Gas Truth after I saw the premiere of the documentary Gasland. And it just seemed insane to me that, fracking was happening and it was contaminating people's water, letting their tap water go on fire because of the amount of methane that was in the water. And it just seemed like it's such a bad idea. I had already been working on some issues like biosolids or sewage sludge, and I just thought I need to get into this issue. And that has led me down this road that has taken me in all sorts of twists and turns because the fracking industry, it's one thing, but there's so many things connected to it. So obviously over time we got more involved in the climate issue, the larger climate issues, because we started to understand how much methane gas is a contributor to climate change. But we already were dealing with the on the ground impacts of water contamination, air quality issues, and so forth. And so, we started realizing that if we could stop the pipelines, for instance, that would be built to allow them to drill for more gas, we could slow down the industry. So then we sort of shifted our attention to that. And then there were a series of hubs that Pennsylvania has wanted to get into. So, they've tried to do a petrochemical hub with the Shell cracker plant out in Beaver County. But, initially that was proposed to be one of maybe five cracker plants in the state. And it's really just the one. So, the movement has managed to keep that contained. And so then the last big one before now was the hydrogen hubs that President Biden had announced in Philadelphia, actually in 2023.
Yeah.
Two of them were going to be touching parts of Pennsylvania. There were seven across the country, but two of them would affect us. And that hasn't come to pass. And right now it looks like those are kind of dead in the water because the industry is relying on a tax credit that appears to be not happening thanks to Trump pulling out all of the, provisions of Biden's, energy plan. This happens to be one that benefits us. Most of them do not benefit us, but that one happens to be if they don't get their tax credit, they're not moving ahead with the hydrogen hubs. So there's a hub that appears to not be happening. And then the replacement for that, frankly, appears to be what's happening now with data centers for cryptocurrency and AI. And so that's the new push. And just like I've been saying over the years, Pennsylvania loves to hitch its wagon to dying stars.
I'll tell you.
So, natural gas by itself, fossil fuels, dying star, it will go away. We should be on top of, the transition. We're just so not where we should be. Pennsylvania only produces 4% of its energy from renewables. We lag behind the rest of the country. So there's one where, we're attaching ourselves to a dying star. And then petrochemicals. I mean, if there's one thing stupider than climate, it's plastics. And so, what do? We turn Pennsylvania into a plastics, just fantasy land, And so they were trying to attract all sorts of plastics businesses here and so forth. Like I said, it really didn't pan out. So what they do, while they kind of got on board with the hydrogen thing, which was ill-conceived, and now with data centers, just like with everything else, there's this huge hype up front because they're looking for investors, and so there's all this talk about this huge capacity and this need, and we're going to need to have all these gajillion data centers, and they're all going to be massive when technology tends to get smaller, and so this idea that we're going to have to keep putting so much pressure on the grid and having to come up with all of this energy is the issue that they're talking about right now in Harrisburg. How are we going to manage all of that need when honestly the need will never materialize the way they're talking about it? But that's not going to stop them from building crazy amounts of power plants and things in the meantime.
Absolutely. And I think, this one of the I think difficulties of tackling the climate crisis is that we know what to do. We know what has to be done. The science is clear, right? And we know that we need to get off fossil fuels and so on. But how does that actually happen, right? I mean, how does that actually happen in the day to day? And of course, it happens through state and local governments. It happens through the federal government. Ideally, it would happen through, when we had the Build Back Better bill, which, I mean, again, not a perfect bill, but the original bill like had some of the most sweeping climate legislation in there, which would have addressed the problem at the scale that it needed to be addressed, right? At least a far greater step in that direction than what we ended up with the Inflation Reduction Act, which was still had some really good stuff in it. But now we're in a situation in which we're having to tackle this at the state level because that's been eliminated at the federal level, and we have to do it through state legislation. And all the while, you've got the big money is behind crafting the way that legislation sounds, and how to kind of, the word that I learned from you, how to greenwash these things to kind of placate kind of like what they consider as environmentalists, which I would say trying to placate like, the destroyers of our planet, right? They're trying to kind of say, okay, we're going to make sure that those folks are okay. So they need to make the rest of us feel good about what they're doing. But when the devil is always in the details on these things, we find out that no, this is almost like, it almost has the feel of like a Silicon Valley pump and dump scheme, right? But using, outdated dinosaur fuel, I mean, so this, you brought this to my attention. I know that you've been doing work on this with many other groups about this House Bill 502. That's the Pennsylvania House Bill 502 called the Reset Plan. Can you tell us a little about what that actually is? And then we can get into a little bit of what's wrong with it.
So I think we all know by now that Governor Shapiro likes to say that he likes to get stuff done. And that's sort of, he even uses GSD as just his shorthand for talking about it. And that actually would be great to talk about sometime when there's more time. But there's that whole book called Abundance and a movement behind it that is about, showing that government can get things done. And so that's definitely his philosophy. I hear it from people throughout politics, but especially from the Democratic Party, of a way of getting people back, making government less complicated. And that's all great. But when it means that you're cutting back on the safeguards that protect communities, in terms of like environmental reviews of giant projects like data centers, or when you're talking about actually taking zoning protections away from municipalities, now we got a problem. And that's what the reset plan does. And so what Governor Shapiro did, all this year he's been out campaigning really for, and he created something called the lightning plan. So it's a suite of bills that kind of breaks up the various aspects of his energy plan, and this the one that we're talking about right now that was supposed to have been voted on, like you said at the top, yesterday. That's the one that would sort of establish the way of implementing all of this, because it would establish a reset board. The R in reset stands for reliable energy, not renewable energy. And in fact, Mandy Steele, who was the author of the bill and introduced it, recently said in an earlier meeting, an earlier hearing, that this is an all of the above energy plan, people. This is not a renewable energy bill. Well, it's actually not even all of the above. Reliable energy tends to be code for fossil fuels and nuclear, always just juxtaposing itself against the intermittent forms of renewable energy fuels like solar and wind. When the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, you can't use it, right? So that's why we need to have these fossil fuels on hand and so forth. So it's actually kind of a diss of renewable energy when they talk about reliable energy, and yet that's what they're really calling it. So it's not really even all of the above. It's clearly relying heavily on fossil fuels and nuclear, and largely being put forward because of this data center push. There are other large-scale energy projects in the state that also would be covered by this, for sure, but right now the major push is to bring in these data centers and to create as much capacity on the grid and independent of the grid to have these dedicated power plants serving some of these facilities. And how do you manage all of that? Who gets to do the approvals? And that would be the reset board. So what's so disturbing about it, I can get into it in much better detail, but the composition of the board would include private sector members like the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry and the Pennsylvania Building Trades. And neither of them is accountable to the public because they were not elected. So why are they approving energy projects? And so that's just one of the problems that we have with it. I
So
could go
let me
on.
ask you this. Yeah, let me ask you this real quick. So I like this in the in the letter that you had sent to kind of members for the members of the House Energy Committee. You mentioned at the end of that about this, and you brought it up, and I was going to say, well, should we get into this or not? But just like that whole idea, the Ezra Klein book, I forget his co-author about kind of abundance, is making all the rounds, making big splash in the all the places that are supposed to make a big splash in, and it's about kind of that kind of getting shit done, right? The whole idea is that some of these kind of regulations and this kind of red tape and the kind of the big government stuff is getting in the way of doing good things in the world. At least that's how it's framed, right? And they use all these real specific kind of examples of it. And I've heard in more than one interview, right, with them about pointing to or at least alluding to what Shapiro did with I-95,
Right.
right? That whole idea, and which was, you gotta. I mean, I would fully say that was remarkable, right? I mean, that was a moment where I thought, like, hey, this is an opportunity to have us, like, to show that we could do really good things for people, right? It like in with government. Right now, of course, it was because it was a major transportation sector, right? It was because it's has to 95 needs to be open and all that. But still, you could imagine a scenario in which things get bogged down and that goes on forever and it causes problems. And I think the abundance folks are really making use of that kind of that image, which has been crafted over a 50-year PR war from the right wing and all this kind of stuff in our country. But do you get the sense that this lightning plan and this whole idea of this reset board is really tied to that kind of funding universe and view of the world? I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, if you look at the co-sponsorship memo for Reset, the subtitle is Getting Stuff Built. I mean, clearly getting stuff done, getting stuff built, cutting through the red tape, all of this is the language of the abundance movement. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's this fantastically funny and sad description of what it takes to put in Biden's broadband
Mm-hmm.
initiative and put that in place. And by the end of it, I think none of the companies that are one of the municipalities that had started out being part of it could survive the process because it was just too complicated. And I know I deal with the bureaucracy all the time. It's maddening.
Yes.
So there's a lot of good behind it, but it's all in how it's applied, just like with everything. And so when you're talking about, let's say, putting in affordable housing in a community, that's one thing, one great way to get it done so that people can move in and have, housing that they need in places where they need to be because it's the productivity center of the country and all that kind of stuff they talk about. That's great. But when it's putting a cryptocurrency center next to your house, and so, there need to be these decisions, and the public needs to be able to have a voice in those decisions about which things we're going to apply those kinds of good ideas to. And that's the problem that the reset board really takes that away. I kind of alluded to it when I was first describing it, but it actually strips municipal governments of their ability. And the initial version of the bill had no public comment period to speak of in it. So there was really just no opportunity for those of us who would have to deal with this to be, getting our voices heard, being given the opportunity to stop these things. And so when they talk about this notion that somehow getting stuff done is going to bring people back to politics or to a specific party, I think they're kind of kidding themselves because if you have no say over some massive project coming to your community, it's really not being viewed by you as a great thing, even if they got it done quickly.
Well, one of the things that I'm glad you framed it in the way that you did, because I find myself with I haven't read the I'll say this, I haven't read the book yet, right? I've read lots of interviews, I've watched the kind of Ezra Klein and multiple interviews, and I do think the kind of the whole that the push behind it, that idea that we can do things, right? And we need to do big things. And there's a need to do this. And one of the reasons why people are so disaffected with kind of governance and all this stuff is because they're not getting their basic needs like met. But as you're saying, this reset plan is a perfect example, like in a microcosm of some of the which fork in the road, which path are we choosing from that information, right? Because one is say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take the anti-democratic move, right? Of we're going to just work with a small group of people behind closed doors, and we're going to shut the public out from kind of talking about those impacts, right? Because what they want us to say in so many of these instances, and it seems like this reset plan is another example of this, is not that like, oh, because government red tape. Really, they're saying people are the problem. Right? It's like the people who are going to have to live next to the data center are going to be the problem. So we
That's
need to
right.
not hear from those people. Right?
I
Does that resonate with you?
Yesterday, Jessica Shirley became the DEP chief in Pennsylvania. She'd been acting secretary. Now she's officially the secretary of the Department of Environmental Protection. And Senator Katie Muth, who's such a champion for us in Harrisburg, she asked her about 502 actually in the confirmation hearing, which was right before when the vote was supposed to take place in a different hearing. And so, in her answer, it was stunning to me. She talked about reading a book right now. I'm certain it was Abundance. She didn't name it, but I'm certain what she was reading. I'd wager money on it. And then she talks about these obstacles. And then she talks about zoning. Well,
Yeah.
zoning is not an obstacle. Zoning is one of the few protections that we have. And so it's depressing to hear that she thinks that it might be considered an obstacle to getting stuff done. But that's why we need it more than ever. That's why we need to make sure bills like this do not pass, because we need to be able to protect ourselves on the ground. I mean, I have been through this so many times with pipeline fights and other,
Yeah.
power plant fights. And, nobody knows their local community like the local government and the people who live there. And so they know what they're concerned about. They know what they need to safeguard against. They know what's going to happen to their property values if they bring these kind of Lulus, locally undesirable land uses to their communities. They
Lulu
know.
is great. Yeah.
And so, so why would they be cut out of the process in place of creating this board that has people on it who want to build stuff? I mean, what project is the building trades going to say no to when it's about getting stuff built?
100%. And I think, and even the whole idea about like putting up zoning as like, the red herring, right? This is the problem. Well, I'm sure anyone who's ever had to kind of like has butted up against some zoning stuff. There's some aspects of zoning that just do not make sense, right? Because they were put in place in the 1900s, and they were to make sure that kind of like, good Christians were protected from brothels, like something like that, and so therefore nothing could be developed in this one particular, something like this. But so I don't think anybody would have any issue with saying like, well, hey, let's look at and address our zoning stuff to make sure that we can do X, Y, and Z with public input, with a way of reevaluating it as a collaborative process. But this seems to be taking the place of saying, well, hey, look, we've got these data centers coming in, right? Pennsylvania wants to kind of bring in the AI. We want to bring in the kind of cryptocurrency folk. We want to put in these giant data centers that are going to service all that stuff, right? But we recognize that people are not going to like it. And we're going to have all sorts of problems about how we going to power these things. Under what conditions do we power these things? What are the long-term implications of that? But they just want to sideline those questions, it seems to me.
It sure seems that way. I mean, it's very reminiscent of Act 13, which was that landmark bill that led to this incredible opinion on the part of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Justice Castile, that looked at these issues and said that basically that rewriting of the Oil and Gas Act, which is what Act 13 was basically looking to cut out municipal governments in such a way that it would level the playing field. Well, I don't want to level the playing field for the industry. I want communities to be able to protect themselves. And yes, if there's some sort of outmoded zoning problem in a given community, go for it. fix these things, but it shouldn't be handed down to them that this is what's going to happen to you and you just really don't get a say in it at all. Have the battles, but don't cut out the voices that need to be part of the battle.
So this bill, as it was being proposed, like take us to like an instance of, say, for example, they wanted to go to bring in a data center and locate it in kind of like a particular kind of community. What would, as the bill was proposing it, what would happen in that situation? Who would be the ones making those decisions? What kind of review process would be it, and how would that be powered?
So it starts with an application process, and that's another concern that I have about it. There's a lot put on a developer up front to go and have, conversations with the municipality, with the local board or the township supervisor board or or council, but they're supposed to be initiating a lot of this stuff. At some point, once they're ready to put in their application, then they're the ones who are required to go through the DEP's process of doing air quality studies and all that kind of stuff. One concern, though, is that that's what DEP does right now, and they don't do a great job. I could go on all day about the DEP, but they have a process. That's what they do. That's their business. And so why do you have to add a layer of bureaucracy onto that whole process, unless it's to make sure that they rubber stamp the permits that much faster? And so when the other entities on the board happen to be pretty much industry friendly, because like it's the Department of Community and Economic Development, which is the ones behind those closed doors that you referred to earlier. They're the ones who negotiate these deals with the state. So when they're the ones that are on the board, when the building trades are on the board, when Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry is on the board, well, there's three members right there. And in PUC, they could go either way. They're on the board. And then municipal government is just not. And so they were actually given in the second version, the amended version of the bill, two ad hoc seats on the board that would really amount to nothing. I mean, they could easily be outvoted, but that was their one concession to the municipal governments. But if you actually read the language of the bill itself, it says that municipal governments will not be able to overrule any of this stuff that is decided by the board. So, DEP manages the process of working with the company or the developer on making sure that all those studies are done. Then in the end, they head up the board with those members who take this thing once it's all been done, the application has been, completed to their satisfaction, and then they decide and they approve it. And once it's approved. And the municipal government has had no say. And if they try to change anything, like one thing that is protected is residential zoning, because who lives in residential zoning areas? Well-heeled people, so they're protected. But if they don't put that protection in place by January of 2024, that doesn't count either. So, pardon me. So it's a real problem that I mean, just communities are left kind of holding the bag, as is so often the case after this board has had opportunities to go through this thing in great detail and they're supposed to then, as a concession, I call it a consolation prize to communities, come up with these community benefit agreements. That's something that's new to the new version, the amended version of it. But again, I call it a consolation prize because what communities really want is the right of refusal. They want to be able to say, no, we don't want this here. I mean, these are polluting projects that are really going to be harming communities. They're already overburdened. This is an agency he loves to talk about environmental justice. Well, communities want to be able to say no when some new thing that's the next thing in line after they've had so many other things come to town that hurt them. They want to be able to say no, and they don't get that right of refusal. Instead, they get playground equipment and a bike path. That's not what they want. So community benefits agreements are nonsense.
Right. And this seems to me to be like very similar to what we see over and over again about, okay, it's a question of power, not of like, rationality. Like, so for example, if you've got the money, you're not going to have a data center kind of plop
Right.
down in your neighborhood. Kind of what you were saying. It's like, and so it's all, I mean, I was going to say it's ironic. It's not ironic. It's kind of like, it's devastating. It's like hypocrisy at its worst. So that, yeah, one, we're going to use the language of environmental justice, but we know those very communities that have been historically impacted the most, negatively impacted by the fossil fuel industries, by kind of every major kind of these developments, are the ones who are going to end up, because we know, have the least political power and are most likely going to have these big centers located right next door to them.
Yeah, I mean, we see it time and time again. We never learn. It just keeps, they keep trying to do the same things. Like I said, it was over a decade ago that the Act 13 ruling came down that protected municipal governments and, kind of, confirmed or validated, that they have authority, and, just never stops. They keep trying to take it away from them. And again, who knows their areas better? And when the state government isn't really doing anything to protect communities, in terms
Right.
of like moving forward on renewable energy, there are a lot of communities that are way ahead of the state government on doing things like that, community solar and so forth. When that's where the municipalities are, then they really should stay out of their way.
Yeah. And I have to say that the one I guess positive about, say, we never learn or they never learn, right? Do the same thing over and over again. I guess the one positive about that is that, well, then we know what to do. Right. Because my understanding is that they wanted this to, this was a lightning plan. This is supposed to happen quickly. But you and some of your friends, as we shall put it, which of folks, basically helped halt this bill before it could be kind of put into law. Can you tell? I mean, this is supposed to happen yesterday, is my understanding.
I mean, this is the role of people like me, organizations like ours, is to inform the public about what's not really being covered, what's not really being talked about nearly enough, and what's not being talked about honestly by our government when asked. And so, we really serve the function of educating people and letting people know that, if you don't like this idea, you better start calling your legislators and telling them you don't want this. And so, thanks to the efforts of many organizations. I mean, just many, many organizations. One I would like to especially hold up is Food and Water Watch did a whole lot of really good work
They do such
right
great
in
work. Yeah.
Harrisburg, but so did PSATs, the Association of Township Supervisors. They understood. They don't want their local control taken away. So there were some real leaders in all of this, but collectively, we were out there trying to inform everybody as best as possible about why this is so dangerous to communities and getting people to call their legislators and encouraging them to say, I don't like this, I don't want you to vote for it. And so the real credit in the end goes to all those people who did make the call. I mean, it's been really impressive to see how many people were willing to speak out about this and how quickly we were able to mobilize people. And so, yeah, they got the message. And so the bill, they just kind of ended the hearing and that was over.
So at this point, like, there's not a vote that's coming up here. They just stopped the hearing. And what's the status of this bill at this point?
So I don't know if you ever follow the daily calendars for bills, but they either like move it over, meaning that it's going to be voted on another time when it's brought up. And so they used that language when they ended the hearing. They said that it was being held over. And so so we don't know what that means because there's such little time left in this budget cycle if they're trying to get it done before June 30th, or since the budget probably won't be done then, whenever the budget does finally get decided. This is the kind of thing they like to get done in that same time period. And so if that's the goal, then there's, almost no time left for them to make the kind of changes they would need to make to this bill. We still consider it to be absolutely unfixable because if it's going to be reliable energy right out of the box, that's not what we want.
Yeah.
Right out of the box, that's just not helping. And so, they might make huge improvements to the municipal control portion of it, but it's still not good enough. So we're saying, call Speaker McClinton and tell her you don't want her to move the bill. Because at this point, that's what it would take. They might make their efforts to try to get something redone and kind of spiff it up and put lipstick on it, but there's just nothing they can do to this pig. And so we really want Secretary, I keep wanting to say Secretary, but Speaker McClinton to just not let the bill move.
Yeah. And so, which effectively would just kind of let it just die a nice, calm, slow death, ideally, until another version of it comes up down the road or something down.
Yeah, like so
down.
many of our bills seem to just die in committee. Let that happen to this one. So,
So
yeah.
you think at this point, right, that the most effective things that people can do out there is to call the Clinton and just basically say, listen, we do not want this thing. Like, what's the message? What should people be telling her about this bill?
Yeah, I would say that the simplest message to deliver to Speaker Bill Clinton is to not advance the bill, not move the bill, just let it die. And it wouldn't hurt to call your own legislators, because if something does happen, we're still going to be letting people know that if they want to protect themselves, they better stay on those phones and tell their legislators to vote no. So so that's the message right now, is to try to get the speaker to to do the right thing. But if that doesn't happen, then people also need to be calling on their own legislators to just say, this is a bad bill, here's why, and we don't want you voting for this.
Yeah, and this is something we've talked about on this show quite a bit about the whole idea of bringing things back to those local organizations that we're building here in Bucks County. As you know, we've had our school board wars, which has gone on and persisted, but as a result of that, have been building stronger and stronger organizations. And the conversations, and this is not just Bucks County, this is all over the place. The conversation shifting to, well, what do we do? Do we kind of go down the same, try to kind of yell into the wilderness about what's happening in Washington, D.C.? Yeah, we're going to do that no matter what we say we should do or not, right? That's going to happen. But like, what do we do really concretely now, right? On one hand, yes, contact Speaker McClinton, right? Excellent, saying like, do not move this bill. But this is also that opportunity to educate ourselves in the community, right? And our local legislators, right? It doesn't matter if they're not going to vote on it or not. That doesn't matter. Say, listen, we just heard about this, heard about this thing, this bill, this reset bill, which is going to kind of like take away local control. That's going to kind of rely upon kind of like, the worst choice in energy possible, the one that's going to help destroy the planet. Like, we can't have that just so that Amazon can do its AI thing, or that because Donald Trump can have another cryptocurrency coin brewed, out here. Those are the things that we need not to do. And, look, we all know this. There's going to be certain local legislative people who are elected in the state assembly and the state senate who maybe kind of even not that familiar with what's going on here, right? Because, there's whatever. Let them know. Let them know that they might not be paying attention, or they might not think you're paying attention, but you are paying attention. And a good place to begin is like, I'm going to put a link to this in the show notes for this week. There's a great letter that came from Karen and others who are writing this. Is from the Better Path Coalition and No False Climate Solutions PA. Fantastic letter. It's about like 5-6 pages long, but it runs through a little bit of discussion about what's happening to what the bill is about and why this should be opposed, like step by step. It's an excellent kind of like primer on like what this bill is about. And if you need little kind of like talking points about what you need to do, and contacting his legislature is fantastic. And again, this was a letter that was to the members of the House Energy Committee that they put together. I'll put a link to that show notes. So you want to take a look at that and do what you can. Well, so Karen, anything else kind of say coming up, or you want to leave people with thinking about either this bill or because some other stuff coming down the pike that you're going to be working on?
Pardon me. I took my cats to the vet, so now I have asthma and I'm just coughing away.
Oh
Pardon
God,
me.
this week I'm sure has been brutal for
Oh,
that too. Yeah.
but anyway, the one final thing I would like to say about the bill, because I'm afraid it's going to come up in other bills, and that is a definition that they added to the bill in its amended form. And it's a definition of cumulative impacts. So when environmental projects that would have an adverse impact on the environment are proposed, any kind of project, really, the idea is for an environmental review to be done, and there are different levels, environmental assessment, but the big one is environmental impact statement. It's a really exhaustive process. And when it's something big like this, one of these big impactful kinds of things, that's almost a guarantee that that's what you want. And they're looking for cumulative impacts of a project. Our president is dismantling environmental laws right and left. And pardon me. So one of the things that he has been chipping away at is the National Environmental Policy Act. And one of the things that creates for is these environmental impact statements, these kind of studies of cumulative impacts. And he has watered it down to reasonably foreseeable impact, which is a lower standard, a much lower bar. And so what was really alarming, frankly, when I looked at the last version of the bill is that the definition for cumulative impact says reasonably foreseeable. That's not. That's misleading. It's the alternative to doing cumulative impacts. And so, like I said, because of the way they kind of snuck it in there, I'm just afraid that that's the way that they're going to try to look at environmental reviews moving forward. And so just keep that in mind that when they're proposing the thing next to your house, make sure that the thing that they're doing is not reasonably foreseeable impacts, but something more exhaustive. And we'll be looking for that too. But that's alarming. It's a really bad turn, especially given that, like we've kind of started out saying, that we have a terrible administration in Washington that's looking to just dismantle every bedrock environmental law, that turning back the clock on any kind of climate progress, and on and on. So who's it up to now to do the right thing? And that's the states. So when you start to see the states using the president's language that's actually so harmful to the environment, that's a really alarming turn. And so people need to be paying attention, doing everything they can to protect their communities, their properties, their families, of course, and just the future.
Well, and that's why we're so thankful. I'm so thankful to have fighters like you, Karen, who have just been nonstop on this issue, for these issues. I mean, range of issues, because we're not talking about one little kind of micro. We're talking about things that can impact our foreseeable future. So, I really appreciate all the work you do, and appreciate you taking the time to kind of spend a little time with us here on the Friday News Lunch from the Bucks County Beacon. And love to have you back on in the kind of in the weeks and months and years ahead, right? As because we're going to need it, that's for sure.
Oh, there'll be no shortage of topics. I'm quite sure about that. But thank you so much. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this because it's so important that people know.
Oh, you bet, Karen. Well, thank you so much, and I'm glad that we're going to see a little break in the heat a bit, and may we that give us all a little respite to regroup and re-energize and get ready going forward. But for all of you, thank you for tuning in for yet another episode of the Friday News Lunch from the Bucks County Beacon. Want to remind you that you can help support the Bucks County Beacon by just heading on over to the buckscountybeacon.com, click on that support the beacon button, right? And you can become a member. So $1 a month, $1 a month. Come on. It's not hard to do. It's easy. It's a click. Come on. Right. So go over there, buckscountybeacon.com, hit the support the beacon button and become a supporting member today. This is Kevin Mahoney for the Friday News Lunch. It's been quite a ride. And Karen, we'll talk to you soon. See you later. Have a good weekend, everybody. See ya.